Hello and welcome to Speak Life. We like to see all things through the lens of Jesus. I'm Glenn.
And I'm Nate.
And today we are joined by Emma Scrivener. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
Yes. And we thought we would talk all things Barbie today because the rest of the world is. And there will be spoilers, really. Probably.
Yeah.
But we decided that we were going to begin not with Barbie the movie, because before Barbie was a movie, did you know Barbie was a doll? A doll.
What is a doll? Sorry.
That's
a reference to the review that I gave of the Barbie movie.
Yes.
You can check out on the Reformed Mythologist channel,
Yes.
which is linked below.
And we were going to force Nate to answer his own question on this podcast. What actually is a doll? But we will get to that.
Okay.
Because first we need to interrogate the whole social phenomenon of Barbie the doll. And I did not have a Barbie growing up. Did you have a Barbie growing up?
No,
No.
I did not.
But Emma Scrivener, you had a Barbie doll growing up. Just one?
One main one. I think I might have had two or three. One of my best friends had five, which is why we were best friends. And yes,
So you were all in on Barbie.
I was all in on Barbie. I had a Barbie from about the age of 8 through till about 13. I had the Barbie Dream House. I had the Barbie Spa. And one of the most traumatic memories of my life is associated with my Barbie. I had 22 shoes in the collection, which were lined up. And you know my liking for all things ordered. My brother, I had drawn on his Action Man. I think I drew hair on him or something. Anyway, something small. And he threw one of all of the 22 pairs down the drain.
Okay. One of them.
Yeah,
Okay.
one of them. One of them. So I was left with the one shoe. But yeah, I was a big Barbie fan, and I turned out fine.
So that's interesting that your brother had an Action Man.
Yes.
Because one thing that sort of comes out, and I thought was a good point to be made in the film, is that before Barbie, really, the kinds of toys that girls played with were babies. And so you play at being mother, whereas stereotypically the toys that boys play with are fully grown adults who can, take on a machine gun nest and win.
Yeah.
And so with Barbie, you get an adult figure that is what you are playing with, and therefore it is not simply training you to be a mother, but Barbie is training you to be aspirational and to think yourself into the shoes of Barbie herself. Does that resonate? Because so Barbie's different to a Cabbage Patch doll. Because with a Cabbage Patch doll, you're the mother and you're doting, but with Barbie, well, what is your relationship with the Barbie toy?
Okay. Well, a couple of things. I think first of all, it's very interesting. Barbie's been on quite the journey from the feminist icon she is today to the original doll, which was, I think, Bild Lilly, a German doll designed for men. And that was where she started off.
Men or boys?
Men.
Okay.
Men.
What size doll are we talking about?
I think we're talking about this size.
Okay.
That size.
Okay.
And what age men are we talking
I
about?
don't really know. I haven't
Okay.
delved deeply into
All
it,
right.
but that
Okay.
was where she started off.
Okay.
I think she's useful in different ways. I liked her house. I liked her stuff. I liked that it was the real world, and I could be part of that real world. My sister had Slovenian families, which was much more family orientated. They had the little furry things. I wonder if my experience with Barbie, because I think Barbie has changed over the years, I think she really reflects the society that we're in. And so I've spoken to friends of mine who had Barbie who are younger than I am, and they've said they found her very empowering because she inhabited a whole range of roles. Now, that wasn't my experience. My experience was she had great hair. Really great hair.
Yep.
And you could plait it, and she had a swimming pool with bubbles, and I just enjoyed all of that.
Yes. And so the Rangers got into, there's President Barbie and there's astrophysicist Barbie and that kind of thing. But you had stereotypical Barbie.
I did. But interestingly, I think they released presidential Barbie. It was in the last few years, and did great fanfare. But she was actually, in market terms, outsold by something like 5-1 by Great Hair Barbie, which is the number one selling Barbie of all time.
Right.
Great Hair Barbie.
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, in the film, there is this love-hate relationship, and in all the publicity that Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig have done, they've been at pains to say that Barbie is a double-edged sword. And
Double-edged sword Barbie. That one didn't sell well at all.
why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Swiss Army Barbie.
Because on the one hand, okay, she's not an infant that you have to mother. She is aspirational. But on the other hand, I mean, she doesn't have, if she was a real human being, she wouldn't have enough body fat to menstruate. You know, like she is impossibly dimensioned. What does that do for a young girl growing up?
Yes. They released Curvy Barbie not that long ago, and she's a size 6, which,
Wow.
again,
Wow.
and that wasn't that long ago. Okay. I am not speaking for Christian women, nor am I speaking for women. I'm only, the views herein are only those of quite a strange person called Emma Scrivener, who had a lot of body image issues growing up and long-term anorexia, full disclosure. So how did Barbie feed into that? Well, interestingly, when I look back on sort of the mental health issues that I've experienced, including anorexia, I would never until today have even considered Barbie being a part of that. Now, as I think back on it, I think, yes, there's something about a visual image of actually holding something in your hands that's very powerful, where you can, those dimensions. And I'm sure it did make a bit of an impact. But as I think back, I also remember at the time, I loved reading. I read loads of fairy stories, and that's something you'd say a good, healthy pursuit for a young girl, etc. So Hans Christian Andersen. But I loved reading about the princesses in it and drawing them. And they were like to a woman. They were waif-like, emaciated.
Right.
They'd fall over at the drop of a hat. They were described as being very, very fragile, very and that, I would say, influenced my view of what a beautiful woman would be, certainly as much as the Barbie would have done at the time.
Yeah. So what is a doll, Nate? Because Emma's talking about this toy that are you invested in that toy? Is that who you are?
Yeah.
What are people doing when they're playing with dolls?
Well, so to use a Tolkien phrase, they are sub-creations.
Okay.
So Tolkien writes in his essay on fairy stories about human beings being sub-creators. So made by a creator to be creative. And so the whole thing with a doll, particularly, which is obviously different from a character in a book or some other kind of art form, is you have a physical representation of yourself or something else in the real world that is now you're able to manipulate it, you're able to put it into circumstances and stories, and you're able to pretend what you know of reality or to distort reality in various exciting ways, in fantastical ways or whatever. But you're basically adopting a kind of creator role in that relationship. So a doll and a puppet, very similar, like a figurine. I mean, Action Man wouldn't be called a doll in the same way, but certainly.
Why not? Why wouldn't Action Man be a doll?
Oh, just because dolls has traditionally been used more for female kind of characters.
But he kind of is, though, isn't he? Action Man is a doll.
Well, yes.
In that sense.
I suppose if you're saying he's a toy or a figure. And so the whole Toy Story thing is kind of built on that same sort of premise, that you have these sub-creations with all of the kind of gadgets and things that they go with, and that you are then going to play out your imaginary life.
Yes.
In various ways connected with reality, playing out things you have seen or would like to see in the world, or you're going to choose to put it, you're going to express yourself through this doll. Yes. And everyone can do that differently.
Yes.
And I mean, the Lego Movie looked at this sort of same thing as well. It's like, do you think the world should be ordered, structured, and pinned down with the Craggle, with the crazy glue, or do you think that all these worlds are kind of breakable and you should be a master builder who's reassembling things all the time?
And why do children like to do that more than adults? What do kids get out of it? It feels like it's a child's play thing.
Well, partly because children don't have much agency in the real world, so they don't. The kids don't get to make that many choices. But once you give them a doll and you create a scenario in which they can represent themselves and they can give voice to something that has more power, then of course a child is going to embrace that. Because this is consequence-free action.
Yep.
Which, I mean, and clearly adults like doing it too. It's just that at various times it's not socially acceptable. And, the whole realm of creative work is in one sense the same play pretend or make-believe that is involved in. So it's not like there's a problem with having dolls. It's what kind of dolls do you have and how do people choose to play with them?
Yes.
Sorry, on that, it's quite interesting. This is maybe jumping the gun a bit, but you're talking about children particularly playing out the dolls themselves and the dolls. There's a sort of inversion of that almost in the Barbie film, where the mum, who was the one who originally played with the Barbie, says... Because Barbie starts having these intrusive thoughts of death and things that really shouldn't be in a Barbie world, and the mother says to the Barbie, "I couldn't be what you are, so I made you what I am," which is almost the reverse of that. And I made an OCD Barbie. I made a menopausal Barbie. I had to bring you back.
But that's weirdly, that's the fact that Barbie can't, the Barbie land can't contain mortality.
Right.
Why not? It's a weird cultural phenomenon that we have, which precedes Barbie, a long shot, which is the absolute fear of death, rejection of death. Right. So to say we've got Undertaker Barbie.
Right.
Mortician
Barbie.
Yeah. Why not have because in a way, if play pretend and the sub-created world, that there's reality and then there's play underneath. If this is an opportunity to try things out and to come to terms with what's in the real world, there's no reason why a child shouldn't be able to express, their feelings about the world, which are less positive, using dolls to do it. So play therapy is like a major thing at the moment. And it's always been fascinating to me, if you do summer camps with kids, is to take puppets along. Because a puppet's weird because it's different from a doll, because as a puppet you now are in a level of control which makes it you in a way that the Barbie doll you can relate to. So in terms of the persona that's being placed into the doll or the puppet or the figure is a fascinating one.
Yes.
And there is a weird Barbie in the film who is being played with too hard, which is an interesting, that is dropped into the film.
Yeah.
And really that could be a whole film in itself. It's just a...
Right, yeah. So why isn't the moral that, you can treat your Barbie the way you would treat your Action Man, actually. And... be rough and embrace mortality and all that kind of stuff. And yet, okay, so the conceit of the film is Barbie is a Barbie girl in a Barbie world, and everything is plastic and fantastic, and she's immortal. And I thought it was a hilarious moment when just in the middle of her being plastic and fantastic, she's just like, I'm going to die. And kind of, it's one of those sort of record scratch moments. Where did that intrusive thought about mortality come from? And it's not proper to a Barbie world, the way that we've imagined a Barbie world. And so in the film, Barbie has to figure out where this has come from. So she goes to Weird Barbie and she asks her what's going on, and apparently she must have been played with by someone in the real world, and she has to connect with that person in the real world and somehow save them. So off she goes with Ken to kind of save whoever this person is, who is clearly troubled, who's feeling mortal thoughts, and things kind of unfold from there. But I guess in the film, I guess we've got something that's quite similar to other films in which you become a real boy, like Pinocchio, in which you've got a kind of a play world and a real world. But what would you say are the differences with Greta Gerwig's kind of?
Well, part of the problem I have with the film is the fact that in setting up an interdimensional, there's a play world, there's a real world, and there is a threshold between the two, and there is set up in the opening act the dynamic, the relationship between real world and play world. You're like, oh, that's really interesting, right? You've done some world building here, and there's a very short kind of piece of exposition that Kate McKinnon's character gives, Weird Barbie gives to stereotypical Barbie about how to go about it. And so they set themselves up for what is potentially a fascinating engagement of how these two worlds interconnect, how salvation from the problem can be brought by action in one world and action in the other world.
Yeah.
And what the relationship, and then they just forget about that.
Yeah.
They just go, oh, yeah, we don't need to worry about that anymore. And so the threshold between the two, which is, again, set up interestingly, you have to go on this long quest.
Yep.
The call to adventure.
Yep.
And you've got to do all these steps and, wear all these outfits in this order until eventually you're rollerblading on Venice Beach.
Yes.
And then you have to do it backwards. The problem is the real world, there are too many places in the real world which are still governed by the caricature of Barbie Land. So
Right.
Mattel is not a real world place. And so the Mattel officers, when they go on that chase sequence around the what are they called, those little
Century
cubicles.
City, okay.
And Barbie and whatever Will Ferrell's character is called,
Yep.
they run into each other,
Yeah.
and then they run past each other, and then
Yes.
they're all going, and you're like, now this would work in Barbie Land.
Yeah.
This is a perfectly legitimate, coherent dynamic playing out in Barbie Land because
Yep.
this is Playland.
Yeah.
It isn't appropriate for the real world if the real world is a real world. If it's just another
Yep.
Barbie Land. So that's where I think Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, in terms of their world building, I think they were actually quite lazy because they don't follow through on what they set up in the first act.
Yeah.
They have their cake and they eat it. But that's
Yep.
less to do with like the messaging and more to do with how I think they have they're so disinterested in this kind of storytelling. Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach doing the Barbie film was insane because they make
Yeah.
Lady Bird, Meyerowitz
Indie
stories,
hits. Yeah.
Squid and the Whale. They make stories about people coming of age in Manhattan or in Sacramento. They don't make fantasy stories in which there is a semi-permeable threshold.
Yes. And they didn't stick to those rules.
They did. From a storytelling and a mythological sort of perspective, I just found that kind of
Yes.
weak. And people might say, "Oh, it's supposed to be a joke, and it's
Yes.
a kind of satire on all this sort of stuff."
Yep.
Well, actually, that just wears thin after a while because I need you to believe in your own world building if
Yep.
you want me to believe in it too.
So that's the take of a mythologist. Emma, how did you respond to the movie?
Okay, so I absolutely I see what you're saying, but I think the film raises so many questions and so many issues that it would be impossible for any film to contain the answers and the narrative to answer them all. I don't think that would be possible. And I think, but I do think that what you're saying about the interaction of the worlds is very interesting. And I suppose there are three things that I found. The intrusion of death is fascinating because in the Barbie land, everything stops. And you can't talk about it. You dance over it. You sing over it, which is exactly what we do in the real world as well. I also like the sort of the narrative, playing on the matrix of the red red pillar.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
It's marvelous
Brilliant.
because I think
Stark or Stiletto.
yeah,
She
well,
keeps resisting the call to adventure.
well, but wouldn't you?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think you would jump into and also that this, obviously the narrative of do you stay where it's comfortable and safe, or do you accept, do you enter into free will and therefore,
bring about your mortality
Yeah.
and
Yeah, although what I think is very interesting about the film is that feeling is what's centered around, and that raises all kinds of issues that it can't then answer later on. But to return to your original question, I loved the film. I do not like cinema. I don't like going to the cinema, you know this. And normally I'll come out of a great film like The Godfather or something, and I'll just say, well, that was noisy. And I did not want to see the Barbie film. I am not interested in the story or in the Barbie particularly, but I found it really like... I found it like it was a big bottle of Coke or candy floss, and I'm saying to my son, have a sip of that Coke. It's really yummy, but don't drink it all. And as I suppose the messages mentally, I'm going, those messages are not right, and that is not the gospel, and therefore it's not right. But on a visceral level, on the feeling level, I found it hilarious. I laughed the whole way through. It was bright. It was funny. It was intelligent. It caught me up, and I think that's interesting as well. And a feeling that puts in a movie that puts feeling at the center. Part of the power of it is not just that it says feeling is important, but you actually feel that when you're in the film. You come out of it going on a bit of a high. You come out of it and you feel like you're in a musical. You want to sing and you want to dance and you want to say things like "smash the patriarchy." Exactly. All that energy. So I feel quite conflicted. With what I agree with. Absolutely in my head with what you're saying, and yet I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and I think the issues that it raises are fascinating, and they're issues that are being discussed hopefully within an audience because it's reaching so many people that wouldn't otherwise be looking at this sort of thing. Now, is that to say the messages are... It's not to say that the messages of it are, good and true or whatever, but then I also think, well, what films are? There are very few films that are explicitly Christian, and are we going to those films in the same way and coming down on them? Now, there are, and I know you'll go into this, there are many things that it says that are profoundly disturbing. And therein for me lies the this is what I feel. You ask me, I feel conflicted because I loved the film. I thought it was funny and hilarious. And I thought the casting and the production was amazing. But there are some things that this fun film that catches you up in its spirit says that are really, really, and really disturbing.
Okay, like what? Go on.
The first scene where the small children are smashing dolls, and the portrayal of motherhood and family units in the film.
Right. Let's think about that, because sort of homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey and that opening scene, and here is the origin story where Helen Mirren, the narrator, kind of tells us girls used to play with dolls. And then Barbie came along, and then there's like this 20-foot kind of Margot Robbie kind of statuesque statue, as people are just wowed by her, and then all the girls smash their dolls in slow motion. And it's a really disturbing kind of a rejection of the old model of motherhood being something to attain. And instead, the aspiration towards being Margot Robbie kind of perfection. And that is maintained throughout the film. There are multiple jokes made of how there was a pregnant Barbie called Skipper?
Midge.
Midge. Yeah. So pregnant Barbie was discontinued, and we're constantly marginalizing pregnant Barbie, and there are no real children in Barbie Land. And you cannot describe Barbie Land as a matriarchy because there are no maters. There's no mothers. Like, it's not a matriarchy at all. And the flip side, the patriarchy, it's not, their vision is male and female, like detached, atomic, just, without family relations.
And yet, the mother-daughter relationship, which whether you think it's a plot device or, whatever, is one of the most genuinely emotive parts of the film, more so even than Margot Robbie's discovery of
self-discovery.
self.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I think in spite of itself, it found an emotional heart in the mother-daughter relationship when it was doing its very best to say, motherhood is entirely optional. And we're going to show you the smashing of dolls so that you can fulfill yourself by yourself. What did you make of that kind of the atomistic vision of humanity?
I mean, I want to say one more thing about the 2001 Space Odyssey homage at the beginning. So Stanley Kubrick didn't have a narrator speaking over his.
No.
Yeah. You can say, well, he's making a completely different type of film. But what he was doing there in terms of having these kind of strange, grey columns that sort of appear, and these, primates are kind of clawing at each other, trying to work out what's going on. That the little girls who are happily playing with their dolls and their tea sets and their prams at the beginning could have looked up suddenly as this great statue of Margot Robbie sort of appears and sort of then put down their little dolls and walked over and just sort of stared at it. And we all would have worked out what had happened, right?
Yeah.
You could have shown quite simply that they've rejected these little baby dolls and now they've turned their backs on them and they want to look at that. Now, that's enough to be able to make the point. Now, I totally get that this is a comedy film, and so the narrator is there. Helen Mirren gives you some more gags, about ask your own mother what it's like in the first line, and also they want to make the kind of joke of someone smashing up, a doll, because rather than just putting it to one side, they're doing it. But as soon as you stop and you look at that image of not just putting this down and turning it engaged in something, but literally breaking up, you're like, oh wow, this is, I mean, it's proper cinema, right? There's action that is happening. Right? You want to see action on screen. That's one of the reasons why it's not a monologue. But when you actually give any thought to that at all, it is really scary. Just
I think
what is going on. And then when it's raising big questions, as I say, there's a deep film, it's raising questions of what is a woman and what is a man, what is a doll, and how does society function. Now, because you've raised those big questions, we are all permitted to rewatch this film with the big questions in mind, which means that we have to return to little girls literally smashing baby dolls apart and think about it. And that again is like you can't say, oh, it's just a joke, and then be talking about the fundamentals of human society.
It's
like, okay.
However funny Ryan Gosling is.
Yes, and it's interesting as well because it is in many ways, you have this great cartoon sensibility, but even in the real world, there is the only other episode of any violence is when you've got Michael Cera's Alan trying to break his way out of the world. But in the violence of it, that first scene stands out as it just there's a jarring moment there. And it really hits hard.
And let me draw that together with an interview I did with Mary Harrington earlier this year, because Mary Harrington is a feminist herself and really doesn't like Barbie. And I think we'll see in this clip why she doesn't like Barbie, because I think there's a clash. And it's not a clash between feminism and the rest. There are different kinds of feminism. And Mary Harrington would say she's on the side of a feminism of care, but what has triumphed since the 1960s has been a feminism of choice, of freedom. And when Mary said that back in March, I was like, oh yeah, that's so true. And then when I saw the Barbie film and I saw that opening scene, I was like, that is precisely the triumph of a feminism of choice and freedom. Over
and I think in watching this, we'll probably get back to that question you actually asked me, which is about the atomistic idea and the way that the conception of the human being has changed.
Let's have a look.
So let's call it a paradigm for what a person is. The governing paradigm within modernity for what a person is somebody is separate by default. And connection is something which we can opt into. And this is, you find this in Rousseau, all the way back to Rousseau, and I think there are liberal thinkers And you find it in Hobbes, you find it in Locke, this idea that the state of nature is something radically isolated and radically atomized and radically competitive and mutually hostile. The Hobbesian war of all against all. Different theorists have different ideas for what we do about that. But the basic assumption is that we're all radically separate by default, and coming together is something which we hope will happen on top of that. Now, this is all very well if you're a guy. But if you're a mother, it's just not true. Or it's certainly not true in the same way. And Rousseau kind of said the quiet part out loud a long time ago on this. He explicitly excluded women from his vision of liberal personhood. I mean, what he proposed for women frankly didn't sound very appealing. He thought of us as kind of charming, compliant support humans who were there to kind of pop out babies and generally be nice and raise the children of the real liberal subjects. Needless to say, a lot of feminists since then have had a few things to say about that. And well, no, this is obviously nonsense.
So, yeah, a radically atomistic, individualized, competitive vision of male and female that far more easily sits within a male view of the world, because men are not biologically connected to their offspring in the same way that women are. And if you think as a woman, you just can't think in the same atomistic sort of sense. And so Mary Harrington is kind of saying, a real feminism of care has profound questions about Greta Gerwig's vision of feminism, and says that actually that feminism of freedom smashes up something that is absolutely fundamental to womanhood.
It's not even specific to the female characters in the film. Ken is told it is good for a man to be alone. You need to go and identify yourself.
Right.
You need to extract yourself from this and Ken thing. You need to be Ken enough. You need to be Ken-ough. And how dare you, Ken, try to come to an understanding of who you are, which is in relationship to anyone else. And I think that is the most terrifying thing about the movie, is that, and this was put as a positive point. So I in looking for it and having done Popcorn Parenting, in which we talk about films with your kids, I found a website called Common Sense Media, which does reviews of films for parents, and with all these really specific ratings on things like drug and alcohol use, or sex and nudity, or profanity, or whatever else it is. So I clicked on it thinking, oh, this is going to be one of those like Christian kind of discernment things where like, oh, you shouldn't watch this film because it contains this many swear words, or there's this violent scene, or someone smoking a cigarette or something. And at the top of it, it said good messaging or positive messages. And you clicked on it, said, this film shows a kind of vision of feminism that includes all women, which I didn't really understand what that meant. But it then went on to say, and it includes the idea that you identify yourself separate from your relationships as a positive message.
Yeah.
Now, that is the most ghastly message ever. Like, it's also patently untrue that we can identify ourselves without relationship with one another.
Right.
But the film demands that Ken be Ken by himself, alone.
Yes.
And that Barbie be Barbie by herself, alone.
Yes.
And that's all we ever are.
Yeah.
And I think that is it. Yeah. That's the thing that's going to undermine humanity, not just women. No, decide today. Who are you?
By yourself. And don't use any relational terms. Don't say son, father, auntie, whatever.
Because you remember how you spontaneously generated out of nothing
yes.
as an individual.
Yes.
And then you lived your entire existence. That's why no one can age in Barbie Land, right? Because they're all like full-grown adults who aren't married and who aren't in dependent relationships.
Yeah.
That is the horror of Barbie Land. Everyone has their own dream house.
Except for Ken. Ken doesn't have his house.
He has.
Until he gets his Mojo
Dojo Casa House.
But you could argue that actually the film, is portraying relationships, but it is the sisterhood. It is the hi Barbie, hi Barbie, hi Barbie, or the Kens who multiply each other, and the who have got each other's back. Because even in those pivotal moments, whenever Ken is separating out, what you're seeing are the other Kens alongside him and cheering him on. Now, yes, at different points, the Kens are turned against each other, and in the real world, I think it's the mother makes the point in her barnstorming speech that what is it? Men hate women and women hate women.
I think it's actually Sasha, the daughter.
The daughter,
who makes
yeah.
the point in the car.
So there are definitely relationships of some kinds that are going on there, and Ken is certainly, throughout the whole thing, reaching out for this relationship, which is seen as a real weakness. Let's have our house. I only see myself in the warmth of your gaze.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the mother-daughter relationship, which is so pivotal, as we've said, to the film. You can't separate out these relationships.
Yeah. And you would say that Ken is codependent on Barbie in a way that's unhealthy for him. It's just that the solution to that is not Ken look within, but have some mates, for goodness sake. And is there any vertical relationship with your maker and all that kind of stuff? So So it's easy for them to say, Ken, look within, because it is obvious that Ken is codependent on Barbie in an unhealthy way, right? And so there is a category for unhealthily finding your relationship in one another. And because they've caricatured that so well, I think that's why the story of I Am Kenough kind of lands.
Though there is a point in the film where Will Ferrell, who's the head of Mattel, says, they're talking about, well, what would a happy ending look like? And he says, well, you guys fall in love, and the film goes, right, let's crack on now.
Yeah.
But in a genuine sense, in a Christian sense, there is, you could have something where you have got Jesus looking in love and saying, right, bringing you guys together. Here's my love for the church. Here's the man and the woman, and in a very real sense, where that could have been just.
And even if it's not, because we don't want to say, therefore, it's one man and one woman riding off into the sunsets, and there's just that romantic vision, as though that's the only kind of love that there is. You can still resist that and say that there's other kinds of, there's at least 3 other kinds of love that C.S. Lewis kind of spoke about. And what about friendship? And what about finding your identity in all sorts of other relationships? So again, they make the good point that the happily ever after doesn't always have to be Margot Robbie ending up with Ryan Gosling. It wasn't in other movies, and it's not in this movie.
But if they're Barbie and Ken, which prior to this film coming out, you would have said these are archetypal categories. A Barbie, a Ken. Barbie is the word you use for woman. Ken is the word you use for man.
Yeah.
Right. Apart from this Alan guy, everyone's like, who the heck is this Alan guy?
Yeah.
You just go, right, there's Barbie and Ken. And once you've got stereotypical Barbie and stereotypical Ken, you are showing in the way that you portray that relationship what you think is the kind of basic relationship between the sexes.
Yeah.
And to then say, no, stereotypical Barbie must become Barbara and live her own truth or whatever it is. And Ken must have no real character progression whatsoever and just be Ken off and be, but they be separate. You're saying we don't have a vision for male and female in union. No. We only have a vision for these two independent, separate and
often at odds with each other in a competing kind of tug of war.
Because the only options are Barbie land or Kendom.
Yeah.
Oh, right. What about some union land between the two?
And that's the problem with the setup of the world, is that because Ken doesn't have his own house, right? That is not how humanity happens. Humanity happens because male and female are in the same house and they learn to negotiate with one another and have a relationship. And we have learnt over the generations that we are not twin tracks in parallel. That's not how humanity works, right?
Yeah.
It's how Barbie Land works, but therefore it is not a good approximation for how patriarchy worked either. Because that's the whole conceit, is that matriarchy in Barbie Land is just the mirror image of patriarchy. But it's not, because it's not even matriarchy. There are no mothers. And we are not independent in the first place. But there's one thing about the origin story that the movie begins with that it's important to kind of clarify. The girls go from smashing their dolls to looking up to statuesque Margot Robbie. That's not where Greta Gerwig wants us to remain, because, you know, it's this double-edged sword. You know, here is this plastic vision of perfection that no girl could possibly live up to, and maybe we need to lower the standards. And so actually the story that Greta Gerwig wants us to go from is, yes, lay aside your dolls, but don't be left with plastic perfection. Be okay with imperfection. Be okay with your mortality. Be okay with your cellulites. Live the best version of you that you can be, and figure it out all by yourself. And so that's kind of where the film goes. But that's kind of an uninspiring vision, isn't it?
I think the mortality that Barbie embraces by becoming real, right? So she, in communion or in conversation with her creator, chooses life and death over a pristine kind of existence as the stereotypical Barbie. We've seen that play, like that's a really common sort of story in terms of like Pygmalion turns his statue into a real woman so he can marry and Geppetto and Pinocchio and all that sort of stuff. So you've got that. But the question is, what is driving that choice to embrace mortality?
Yeah. Right.
Is it love? In this case, only for yourself. Like it is only the sense that she would like to have an experience for herself and with her gynecologist, which is more fully orbed than she currently has as stereotypical Barbie in Barbie Land. There is no. It's not like I am choosing to embrace mortality for the love of someone else, which of course is the gospel, story. He didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the nature of a servant.
Yeah.
For the purpose of submitting himself to death.
Yeah.
Why? So that he had a that was
himself.
Bucket list. No, it's like in order that he might redeem those who were held under the bondage of slavery and death. There was love that's driving it, not just this sense of. Do you know what? Barbie Land's been like kind of boring because every day's like the same. It's always amazing and it's always girls' night. Wouldn't it be interesting to embrace something different?
I didn't see it quite like that. I saw it as being that death comes in because in a sense, her sort of semi-creator, the mother figure, was herself experiencing rejection of her own daughter, things like menopause, life, basically real world life, which is mentioned a few times in the film. They do mention a lot of things with mental health and so on. And so it was that meant it wasn't necessarily that Barbie just woke up one morning and went, well, I think that was forced into her world by her sort of the smaller creator. So which would set it up, which would be a different premise then entirely, and sort of talks about the other world coming in. What I also think is quite interesting is the way that the creator and creation relationship is set up as well in the film. So obviously you've got the little girl that goes into the mother who is picturing Barbie and her own life is intruding into it. But you've also got, one of the reasons for Barbie embracing death is because she meets her own creator, Ruth. And Ruth says to her, and Barbie says to her, look, I don't want to be just an idea. I want to be a creator. And that is the most human thing anyone could ever say, isn't it? I mean, that is the definition of human. I want to be God in my own world. And Ruth takes her hand and says, what you need to do is to feel. You've just got to feel. And so that is what calls her into it. And I think that's a bigger, if that's the case, and I might be reading it wrong, but that's a very different narrative to her, sort of, well, Barbie Land's a bit boring and I want to. You have then got something that is breaking in from outside and also reflects what I think is a good feature of the film and what Ruth herself says. This world is irrevocably broken. So Ruth, the creator, says to her, here's the problem. The world is absolutely smashed to pieces. And that's very, very true. And I think that reflecting and the death breaking in, I saw that as something that wasn't just Barbie reaching out, rather that was the brokenness of life, the brokenness of this world, which the film helpfully does acknowledge to some extent. It just that the film raises lots of different issues and it answers them with, things that are outside of the gospel, which means it doesn't really have any, there's no truth, there's no hope in real terms, but it does raise these concerns in a very good way.
Did you think that Barbie's embrace of humanity, as in becoming human, at the end of the film, how connected would you say that was to Gloria's humanity? Because I think that's, again, where when they set it up.
Gloria's the mother?
So Gloria's the mother.
Yep.
And so it's her anxiety and menopause, whatever it is, and concerns are bleeding over into Barbie Land.
Well, I can't be you, so I'm making you into me.
Okay. And so Barbie then becoming human is a way for her to embrace,
save her.
Glory,
I mean, the very first time she goes, isn't that to heal whoever it is? Because she doesn't know it's an adult at that stage.
She thinks it's Sasha, doesn't she?
To begin with, she does cross the threshold.
Yeah.
But it is kind of inverted in that, like in the gospel, we down here cause death. And then someone from up there crosses the threshold out of love for us to save us, that we might be raised to immortality. It is the inverse in Barbie, isn't it? Death comes from outside, and then the solution is to embrace that scary world of mortality and to go out into mortality. It's an interesting inversion of the gospel in that sense.
And I suppose because Gloria and Sasha cross over the threshold into Barbie Land.
Yep.
Perform a
salvific
role by speaking.
Declaring.
And then they take Barbie with them back into the real world. So in that sense, there's just a really interesting dynamic whereby effectively America Ferrara's character Gloria saves Barbie from a problem that America Ferrara's character Gloria gave Barbie because she was playing with her daughter's doll and drawing kind of scary existential pictures, which I just find that is a really dramatic. No one's allowed to save anyone, really.
Okay,
again,
embrace your own path.
Yeah, again, there's no kind of federal, there's no one who is helping to act as a substitute for someone else, other than, exactly as you point out, in that painful sense that you are a kind of voodoo doll for a while for my anxiety and existential dread. And did that help? Like, are you over that now? Was it redemptive for you, Gloria? And I don't think it really is. I think what Gloria says in that amazing, amazing speech,
Which is a sermon.
Which
and
is
the
a-
whole film is preaching.
It's saved by preaching.
the preachiest thing. I don't think there's any resolution there either. There's nothing that
There's
is
an awakening.
It's just an acknowledge. It's like,
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you see these
see
are
it?
contradictions?
Yeah, it's an awakening. Yeah.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah. What did you make of that, Emma? So that's the speech that's kind of gone viral, and you can find it's being published in full in all these articles left, right, and center. It is America Ferrara, Gloria, who is in Barbie Land with Barbie, and Margot Robbie Barbie says, "I don't feel pretty anymore," or something like
I'm
that.
not beautiful anymore.
I'm not beautiful anymore, which provokes Gloria to preach to her about how impossible it is to be a woman.
Well, also provokes omniscient narrator Helen Mirren to say no to the filmmakers.
Yeah.
You can't cast Margot Robbie.
She might not feel beautiful. She is still beautiful.
Yeah, we might come back to that about, is Margot Robbie not the right person to be playing Barbie if this is the message that we want to give. But how did you respond to the barnstorming sermon, as you called it?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of what is said there is true. I hear that and I go, yeah, that has happened. But I think a lot of what it was said there, the film could be done from a male perspective and have a similarly barnstorming man saying the contradictions of male identity that would be just as powerful. And some of the things that are sort of being referenced just for women are actually true for everybody. For example, everyone has to be extraordinary. And that is something you see in Ken and in the others all the time. And interestingly, so I thought, it's a great piece of movie making. It's very well written. Yeah, absolutely. But I found the narrative, the identity narrative of Ken, far more compelling than of Margot. And I think that it does raise these issues. Ken says, why is he so attracted to patriarchy or whatever? He says, people respect me. Yeah. And this is a world where men have no respect. And it's very interesting as well, because I read an article in which one of the actors who plays Ken was talking about Greta's vision of the Kens. And he said, I think it's great. He said, look, I think one problem is that we're being vilified as if Greta says men are evil. Men are not presented as evil in this. He said, that's absolute nonsense. They're just children. But I think that's even more problematic, because if someone is evil, you're going to take them seriously, right? They're an equal. You can engage. You can. If the men are just children, well, they're just inconsequential. And this is what Ken is railing against. And this is actually, I think, just as big an issue for men as those things that were mentioned in that speech. Where in this world can a man stand? How does he get respect? How does he have any say in a world where he's a child and he's completely knocked out of the equation?
America Ferrara's husband, for instance, Gloria's husband in the film, we had no idea she had a husband until I think they just remembered, she must have a husband. And he's not the most impressive man, is he?
And Ruth the creator, in real life, Ruth set up Barbie with her husband.
Right. I didn't know that.
Well, we don't see him. We don't see him in there. Now, I say all of that, but also there's part of me that wants to go, okay, but what was good about the film? Because I really, in many ways, I really loved it. And I thought it's very funny. It's very intelligent. It's very bright. It's very sparky. And there is a sense in which they're doing, they're making these things themselves. So they put into the little Sasha's mouth all of all of the controversies about Barbie and that's very knowing. And I don't think any film could resolve all the different tensions. The question is, is it that the film is, do we sort of rule it out because it raises questions that no film could possibly answer, and because it's not an explicit Christian film, which most films aren't anyway, or do we say, well, look, it's taking one aspect of one part of society and one part of, sexuality, and it throws a very interesting light on that. But inadvertently, or maybe advertently, it also says, because I came out of that going, not just, I didn't come out of it going, not just, oh, poor women, we've been oppressed, which is what you might think that speech does. I came out of it thinking, wow, where does Ken go in this? If I was a man, I'd be coming out of that feeling like I'd been massacred. I came home, and even the last few days, I've been thinking, about our portrayal of men, Pepper Pig, oh, silly daddy pig, da 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 da, or in real. Now, if the movie can raise things like that and give a dialogue right across the board, then that's a really, really positive thing.
But I think that would be inadvertent, because I think where does Ken go from here? And as soon as I saw the film, I started thinking Ken is basically, and all the men are now going to go their own way. And there's a whole movement called Men Going Their Own Way, and you can kind of Google it. And it's caught up in the manosphere, and it's caught up in all kinds of ways in which men are basically opting out and saying it's too difficult to play this game. And in that sense, has this film created the kinds of people that this film really despises, the men going their own way and the manosphere and that kind of thing? Because if we are twin tracks, and if it is a tug of war in which one wins and the other therefore must lose, then how do you avoid not actually creating the kinds of men that Greta Gerwig does not respect in the first place? Okay, so the girls smash their dolls, look up to statuesque Margot Robbie. But statuesque Margot Robbie realizes that plastic perfection is not the goal, embraces her mortality, goes out.
While also looking plastic perfect.
While also looking absolutely perfect. And that's one of my questions is, I saw it in a cinema full of teenage girls and younger looking up, and I wondered to myself, if plastic Barbie doll is crushing for a young girl to look up to, is not celluloid Margot Robbie even more crushing to look up to, because she's also kooky and sassy, and she can forge her own way, and that she's brave enough to forge her own way in the world and not care what other people think. And if it's crushing to have to be astrophysicist Barbie,
arguably driven by the fear of cellulite, arguably that is what drives her out, as well.
But she will embrace that cellulite because at the bus stop she saw the older woman all by herself. This older woman was not a matriarch. This older woman, has no family around her, but this older woman is sassy, and she looks across at her and says, "You're beautiful," and she says, "Don't I know it?" And so she's embracing that. She's embracing a trajectory towards being alone, I would say, but choosing her own path. And if the doll is going to crush an 8-year-old girl, isn't Margot Robbie and the message of this film going to crush 8-year-old girls even more?
I think part of the reason it will crush them is because there are only physical imperfections and vulnerabilities within Margot Robbie as Barbie in this film. There is no recognition of a compromised soul. Arguably, you could say Ken is actually better, and that any young guys who go and see this film could look at Ken and could say, "Oh, hold on, I recognize a little bit of myself in him." Because the Ken that is shown from the beginning of the film is a jealous Ken.
Flawed. Yeah.
He is just a jealous guy.
Yeah.
And if I see in myself, a competitive streak and a desire to kind of win someone over and play guitar at someone.
At somebody.
Right?
Yeah.
And to impress people. If I see that in myself, okay, now I've found a character who is doing that same thing. I think the challenge for young girls looking at Margot Robbie's character in Barbie movie is, what do they do when they see things in their own soul that they haven't seen in Margot Robbie? She's she's flawless spiritually speaking.
Yeah. She did say sorry once. She did say sorry to Ken that one time. But
For having
girls' night every night.
Girls' night every night.
Yeah.
I think, and that's where what is your film saying about human nature? How optimistic or pessimistic is your film about humanity? And I think when we're talking about having films which are good, true, and beautiful, one of the true things that they do is that they show human beings the way human beings actually are. And we, a lot of the time, really suck. We're really compromised, and we do all sorts of things for really terrible reasons. And we have to come to terms with those aspects of our character. And I think this film is too optimistic. It puts the problem out there in some weird kind of structural imbalances in society. It doesn't give you any forgiveness. It doesn't give you any salvation in that sense.
And that goes back to the Rousseau point that Mary Harrington was saying. You know, Rousseau saw us as we're all born free, but we're in chains because of the systems that are outside of us. And he had a real denial of original sin, which means, there's a perfection to us. The real problem is out there. And when you deny original sin, then you deny the need for all of us, not just those in power, to have to humble themselves and repent and that sort of thing.
Sorry, just to,
go on.
I think that's great. I think what Nate said is great. That's absolutely spot on. You know, as a diagnosis of the film, what the film does do, however, that I think is good is it expresses the longings and the brokenness that we have. So it sets that up very well. But as you say, there is no gospel, and therefore it's a bit like you have, it's like I was talking about the high of it earlier on, like you eat too much candy floss and you come out of it and you're on a high and you're like, woo! But when you actually sit and think about the problems that it raises, there is no hope, there is no answer, and there's a big sugary come down from it.
We will. Draw stumps here. We've got one more question for you, Emma. We're going to ask you about the ending of the whole movie and what it actually means. But if you're not subscribed to our channel already, please do hit the subscribe button, and right next to it you might find the join button, and at the join button you can support us. Speak Life, we exist to make Jesus known in so many different ways, and you can join us either as a supporter at $1.99 a month or as a partner at $4.99 a month. And one of the things you'll get is extra content like our final question with Emma Scrivener. But Emma, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Thank you, it's been a joy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nate Morgan-Lowe.
Thank you, Glenn Scrivener.
See you again soon.